Hello, my Schnuckum. Welcome back. I'm so looking forward to sharing with you how I feel like a fraud. Because doesn't everyone love to just out themselves like that? But I'm specifically talking about how the act of creating something can make you feel like a fraud. So if you have ever gone to make something or you want to go make something and you feel like a fraud, then this is for you. Okay. So buckle up. If you haven't already felt the theme of this show, it's talking about really real shit that is uncomfortable, but wildly human. So let's get into it. A few weeks ago, I began the journey of writing my very first book. And as a little girl, I always loved to write, but I never thought that that was necessarily a goal of mine. It wasn't obvious from the time I was little. But when I look back, I do see this for both myself and my clients. There's usually some sort of theme of, yeah, I love to write. I always had diaries, I always had journals. And I still remember my teacher, Mrs. Gregory, it was fourth grade, and she would give us these marble composition books, and we would get to take them home, write stories, bring them back, and then give them to her. And she would take them home and she would read the stories and write little comments in the margins. And that was just such a dear process. I loved it. I loved the feeling of someone seeing my words and writing back to me. So there were signs that I was a writer, but this could be a whole other podcast. I had to claim it. I had to say, I'm a writer, and I take women through that journey all the time. But when I think back to the moment I actually realized I wanted to write a book, I was post divorce and I had actually recently given up dating because I was in a very toxic cycle of choosing the wrong men, being hyper codependent on the validation I was feeling from dating and from just male attention. If you've listened to episode one, you know all about that cycle for me. But I needed to break off male attention for a period of time. So I took a detox. And in that male detox that I did, I needed to fill the time. I had a lot of time left over. Okay. I hate to admit it, but it's true. And in that time where I was not dating, so I had a lot of free space, I decided to go through the process called the Artist Way. Many of you may know this. It's by Julia Cameron. It's a very powerful process that combines something called morning pages, which is essentially just stream of consciousness writing every single morning, 3 pages, no matter what. And then artist dates, where you take yourself on these lavish and sometimes not so lavish dates to stoke the creative muse. And I knew how I operated, and that is one of accountability. I can do anything if somebody is doing it with me. And that's not something I feel shame about. It's just something I'm honest. I'm like, I'll go to the gym if I have a trainer. I will finish the Artist Way if I'm taking my girlfriends with me. So rather than waiting for someone to bring themselves and say, I'm going to do this process, I just said, I'm going to do this. And I invited like 8 of my closest friends to go through it with me. And one call in particular, I was sharing what was coming up and it hit me like a lightning bolt. I was like, holy shit, this is it. I think I'm going to write a book. And I saw the book, I felt the book, but I waited. I waited and waited and waited. And sometimes creative processes need periods of gestation. I don't fully think that was it for me. I think for me, I was terrified. I was terrified of who I would become. I felt so overwhelming, the process of writing a book, but it's a dear, dear, dear desire of mine. So much so that it has not left me. The book itself has morphed. And I think that's, again, a whole other conversation, which is that our ideas, if we don't act on them, they may morph and change and shift. And the book that I wanted to write is no longer the book that I am writing because I'm different now. But it was finally time for me to really face the part of me that is ready to write a book. Well, ready, I'm going to put in quotations. And my fiance, Eli, is also writing a book. And that is such a dream, also, the dream within the dream, which is to have a partner who is so powerful in his own right, but also really pours into my dreams too. And so I feel like side by side, we're these two sovereign, creative, powerful individuals that also like to come together and make each other's dreams come true. That's just the coolest thing. And I would be lying if I said it doesn't make me super wet when he pulls out a whiteboard and it's like, let's work on your business. I'm like, oh, just do me now. Sorry, mom, if you're listening to this, but there's something about him seeing me in that way and the intimacy of wanting to build my business with me. 10 out of 10 recommend. So it was a weekday afternoon. We're sitting in the kitchen and he just looks at me and he says, "Baby, I'm thinking about bringing a book writing coach to come out to Boulder to work with us. What are your thoughts?" And I don't even think he got the sentence out of his mouth before I was ugly crying. I mean, sobbing in the kitchen. I don't even think I knew that what was going to come out of me, but the idea of my dream finally coming true and my partner helping me to bring it to life. And he was bringing this coach out for himself, but said, "Of course, I want you to go through this process with me. So let's collaborate and figure out what that could look like for us to both bring our books to life." And it's just so surreal and so intense and so much to take in. Because when you want something that badly and then all of a sudden it lands, your nervous system is like, whoa, am I actually ready for that? And the next morning, it was so intense that I actually felt like I was starting to get sick. But this time I knew better because I've had this happen so much in my life that it became something I actually wanted to work on, which was that before a big life event, it could have been anything, a birthday. The first time Eli flew me to go meet him in Europe, I got so sick. So this was not something that I was unfamiliar with. I knew that when my body was scared and what I'd like to call upper limiting, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, that I would get sick because it was more familiar for me to be sick than it was for me to go after my dreams. So I woke up the next morning after Eli said, "I'm bringing a book coach out." And I had a sore throat, a fever, I was nauseous, and I knew not to take this seriously. Not that my symptoms weren't serious. It wasn't like I was gaslighting myself, but I knew that I clearly had blocks around this level of creation. And like I said, it was more comfortable for me to be sick than to achieve my dreams. That is more familiar. Now, Gay Hendricks, who wrote The Big Leap, one of my favorite books of all time, if you have not read it, run, go put this in your cart right now. It is such a powerful book, specifically about the discomfort that can come from wanting to step into a new level of your life. And he says in this book, each of us have an inner thermostat that determines how much love, success, and creativity we allow ourselves to enjoy. When we exceed our inner thermostat setting, we will often do something to sabotage ourselves, causing us to drop back into the old familiar zone we feel secure. So that is what Gay says in the book. And I remember the first time I read this book, I'm not joking, I would throw it across the room. Like I would open a page, read, and then be like, fuck this book. And I would toss it because it was so confronting, because I felt so seen. And as y'all know, that doesn't always feel good because it felt like he was speaking directly to me in the parts of me that I was hiding, the parts of me that could see myself being on stages, writing books, having podcasts, but then kept limiting myself and getting sick and having all of these things happen. And this can show up like worrying. So just unnecessary worry and anxiety about the future, criticism and blame, attacking yourself or others. Sometimes for me, this could look like Eli and I getting into a big fight right before something really important happens. Physical illness and injury, which I just spoke to. So getting sick, having an accident, experiencing some sort of ache that stops the progress because you are so uncomfortable physically that you feel like you can't move forward. And then, deflecting compliments like, "Oh, not me. That couldn't be me." These are all subtle and not so subtle ways of upper limits. And in this process of bringing something to life, we can feel like a fraud. That is where the upper limit can kick in. Is like you have a dream, you start to go act on that dream, and then boom, get sick. Boom, pick a fight with your spouse. Boom, trip and fall and hurt yourself, whatever it may be. It seems unconnected, but Gay asks you, and I'm going to ask you to imagine how could this actually be connected to me unknowingly. It's not like you're doing it on purpose, sabotaging yourself. And there are these hidden fears that come up around upper limits. And he basically said, universally, we all have some level of these four. And I'm going to read them to you because I want you to identify for you as a woman who is a creator or a want to be creator. Maybe you haven't made anything yet, but you really want to be playing in the realm of artistry, writing books, making podcasts, starting YouTube channels, you name it. It could even be like posting on Instagram, creating a personal brand. I want you to check in and see where these hidden fears may be feeding your upper limits. So, number one is feeling fundamentally flawed. This is the belief that you are inherently broken or unlovable. I for sure had this when it came to men, and I had to do all sorts of stuff to move through that. But that, again, that feeling of like, that's for them, not for me. I couldn't possibly have a podcast. I couldn't possibly write a book. I couldn't possibly start a YouTube channel because there's something not good enough about me to be able to do that. That, my love, is a fear directly feeding your upper limit, keeping you from being able to go after what you want. And we're going to get to how we move around this. Okay. The next one is disloyalty and abandonment. This one is sneaky, but this is the fear that succeeding means you are leaving behind the people you love or betraying your past, betraying your family, betraying the people that came before you. Because if you're successful, then that means that you are not being loyal to your family and the people who care about you. Sneaky, sneaky. Okay. Number 3, belief that more success means more burden. I for sure have had this one. Still catch myself with this. Basically, the more success you have, the more it's going to be too much to hold. This could look like your parents saying things like, oh, the rich neighbors so and so down the street are assholes, right? Like this subtle belief that the more money you have, the harder life is going to be, and the more challenges you'll experience, and the more people won't like you because you're going to be this burden, or that it's going to break you because it's so much. And maybe you've had burnout before and you're scared that if you try success in the way that you did previously, it's going to knock you out. And last but not least, the crime of outshining, the belief that you must diminish yourself and your brilliance to avoid making others uncomfortable. This shows up a fuck ton with women, myself included. Not wanting to outshine the people you care about, or not even people you care about, just not wanting to stand out too much because it's going to make others feel uncomfortable. This could look like, this is such a simple example, but someone goes to give you a compliment, and rather than just receiving it, you immediately have to go compliment them back because it would be too much for you to be complimented and to not just be able to receive that from someone, because God forbid they're not complimented too. And I want you to really check in and be honest with yourself after I read those. You may need to go rewind, re listen to them. Also, if you download the book, this obviously goes into it in much more detail. But where do you, being fully expressed and in your zone of genius as a creator, where does that feel too good to be true? Like that's someone else's dream. That's for her. That's for her, not me. Because we're going to stop that shit. That does not get to fly here anymore. Okay. And I can say this with my whole chest because I've worked through it myself and I know what that process is like. And I'm going to hold your hand and kick your tush through that. Okay. And I want you to really check in with the upper limits. Like, where are you creating this feeling of feeling like a fraud when really you were born to be doing this? You were born to shine. You were born to express. You were born to create. Because the second you see this, your whole world is going to begin to shift. It may feel like it's going to crumble at first, but it's going to start to shift in a pretty dramatic way. Now, back to the book writing process. So, our friend and coach, Jim, comes out to Boulder and he takes us through this extraordinary process. Okay. It's a 2-day process of him asking us these really deep, profound questions to get to the core of our book. But it didn't just feel like, to me, the core of a book. It felt like the core of my heart and soul. Because if you can't tell already, I am not a woman who creates things at a surface level. And if you're listening, you probably don't want to either. You are here to move mountains and inspire people and make them move and feel something. And that doesn't come from doing surface level shit. So as he's taking us through this multiple day process, I'm like feeling more raw and more revealed and more seen. And I would say at the end of day 1, I felt pretty extraordinary. I was like, okay, that was amazing. So cool. But then by day 2, I felt like I'd been hit by a fucking truck. And that night when I went to bed, I felt so horrible, spiraling, and just noticing how it's been so easy to keep that book dream at a distance. I didn't have to be intimate with it because I kept saying, I'm going to be a published author one day. Well, now there is no one day. That one day is here. And it no longer felt safe to hold that dream far away because I was in it. And to face your dream and say, I'm going for it, is a totally different story than to say, one day I'll be a published author. One day I'll be a writer. One day I'll be a speaker. And every story I have ever had came right up to the surface. I'm in bed and Eli and I are trying to go to sleep. I suck. Who's going to read this? It's terrible. No one would ever want to read this from me. And then I make it worse and I just take the knife and I stick it in and I twist it because I get on Instagram and I see a woman who has an audience of like 500,000 people who just happened to publish a book that was really similar to the one that I wanted to be writing. I literally like threw myself on the bed. I like this tortured soul and I'm like, I'm done. I am so just sad emo girl, could not get over it. And Eli's almost laughing because he's like, who is this woman? Who is this woman who is writhing in pain and suffering? And he knew I was just hitting an upper limit, just like you have probably hit one or will hit one if you start to dream big enough. And I could have a whole other show on this idea of it doesn't matter if even the stories are the same, you still get to create yours because the truth is there's very few, if any, things as an original, such a thing as an original thought anymore. I believe that there's all of these ideas and inspiration just floating up in the quantum, and some of us get to pull down and bring them to life. But the truth is you and I, we could write almost the exact same book, but it's going to hit differently because my lived experience is different than your lived experience. And the way that your soul will tell it will be so different than mine. So I just had to make that note about the woman who's writing a similar book because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It is our goal and our mission to keep being in the arena and bringing our dreams to life and to not let things like that trip us up. So, why am I telling you this? Why am I telling you with a podcast called Seen that I felt like a freaking imposter? Well, number one, because hi, I'm human and more people need to be honest about the creative process. Because nowadays you just go on Instagram and you see the finished product. When do you ever get to see the behind the scenes of somebody going, holy shit, what it took for me to go to A to B to get this thing out? Crying, telling my fiance that I was a total fraud, going through a whole book writing process and retreat thinking it's going to be incredible, only to realize like I feel more alone and sad and confused than I've ever felt in my creative process. So that's number one. I don't want you to feel alone in that. And number two, because I want you to understand that feeling like a fraud is a part of the journey. It's not a reason to fucking stop. It is your initiation. Okay. When you feel like a fraud, I want you to go, okay, this is the initiation. And sadly, and I've been this woman, sadly, there are women that when they get to that point, they go, I'm going to believe this thought. You're right. I'm not ready. I'm not ready to write this book, start this podcast. And you'll know if that is a felt sense like I'm actually just not ready. There's more things that need to happen in my life because maybe you're writing a book and there's a big piece of that book missing still versus the noise, the chatter. And that feels very different. Very different. That noise and chatter, it's not you, it's fear. And that fear is going to try to negotiate with you. But you don't have to stop there. You get to push through that feeling. Because sometimes it is going to feel like a push. I'm not going to lie. I could sit here and say, be gentle with you and say, like, no, you get to love yourself through it. No, sometimes it's going to feel like you fucking pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and going, oh, I'm just going to keep going anyway. And you go for it. And if you don't have that imposter feeling, you probably aren't close to the core of your dream yet. Because if it is truly touching that center column of you, your unique genius, your unique essence, it's going to feel tender. Think about it. Think about what it would be like to open up and show the innermost part of you. That's a vulnerable process. So if you don't kind of feel like, ugh, I feel like a fraud right now, I feel naked, then you're probably not close to that core. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't create things if they don't feel vulnerable? Hell no. But some of us have these bigger core dreams, and that's really what I'm speaking to in this moment. Now, that dream on your heart, I want you to ask, what is it? You probably already know. It's probably just circling, sitting right there in your chest. What is ready to be birthed? And I want you to go out there and I want you to claim it. You can DM me and say, Bryn, I'm going to da, 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 da. You can tell your best friend. You can tell your partner. You could write it in your journal. Whatever you got to do to go claim it, go do that. And know that none of us feel fully qualified, self included. not in the beginning, not when you're starting your podcast, not when you're starting your YouTube, not when you're starting your book, not when you're starting your Substack. When you feel like a white belt, it's because you're at the beginning and you're going to feel like, oh, what am I doing? But then I want you to imagine that little birdie named Bryn, coming in, whispering into your ear and remembering, oh, Bryn told me this was going to happen. Bryn told me this was a part of the process. So I don't have to fear the part of me that feels like a fraud. I don't have to listen to that part of me because this isn't the obstacle, it's the initiation. And it is your job to keep going anyways.